Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. Polyphenols are compounds found in plant foods, particularly fruits like berries and grapes and apples and cherries. Green tea is particularly high in polyphenols. There are actually over 8,000 polyphenolic compounds that have been identified in various plants. There are several different classifications of polyphenols, including phenolic acids, flavonoids, stilbenes, and lignans. Now, you might wonder, why am I talking about polyphenols? Well, the reason is because these fabulous compounds in plants offer protection from ultraviolet radiation, pathogens, and the development of conditions like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and neurodegenerative diseases. The positive effect is based on the fact that the polyphenols protect the body against reactive oxygen species, which are common in almost all cases of degenerative disease. Processed foods and supplement makers, because of this, continue to add, or increasingly add, polyphenols to their products because once they do, they can start making structure-function claims about the benefits of consuming more polyphenols in the products they sell. Now, I've ranted and raved about this for a long time. These ridiculous junk foods fortified with a nutrient or 2 or 5 or 10 so that they can be marketed as health foods is just incredibly aggravating. But even more important, a new review cautions that while polyphenols are really beneficial for health at low concentrations such as what you might consume in an apple or a pear or a cherry or green tea, higher concentrations in supplements and what are called functional foods may not be a good idea. Researchers reviewed studies published since 2010 and were able to find 386 papers involving humans and animals, polyphenols in whole foods and drinks, and plant extracts and supplements. And the analysis showed that while human and animal trials both showed polyphenols to be protective, some trials in which higher doses came from supplements and fortified functional foods actually caused damage rather than improving markers for health. They cautioned that in functional foods and supplements, the concentration of polyphenols is higher than what naturally occurs in foods and may not be beneficial. The researchers wrote, and I think this is a beautiful thing here, often in the case of micronutrients in general, the dose-response curve is U-shaped. And what it means is a beneficial effect at low concentrations changes to a detrimental effect at high concentrations, and this tendency is clear in many of the reports described. They also reported that plant foods contain a wide variety of nutrients which have a positive effect on health due to their synergistic actions with one another, which is quite different than the effect that somebody can expect when they consume isolated nutrients in supplement form. So in other words, more is not better. Less is actually more, and that means eat whole foods. That's the best way to get your nutrients, not to take supplements and to eat fortified foods. All right. This story I think is really interesting. It started last year. I covered a story about Geisinger Health System and its new program for offering refunds to dissatisfied customers, just like other businesses do. What a concept. Operate healthcare as if it is a consumer-oriented business, just like all the other businesses on the planet. Well, there was no shortage of critics at the time who claimed that medicine is not like any other business, and by the way, that's true, but it doesn't have to be that way, and that Geisinger would end up in financial ruin as a result of this decision. Critics also warned that patients would take advantage of the new policy and that the policy would be bad for medicine because it would expose the shortcomings of medicine and medical treatment to the world. Now, the fact that there was so much concern about making patients who complained whole again, that would actually cause financial ruin, I think that's a huge wake-up call that we really need to do some things differently in healthcare. But undaunted, Geisinger's CEO insisted that the program be implemented, and a year later, the results were reported by Greg Burke, who was Chief Patient Experience Officer for Geisinger. Now, Burke starts off in his article acknowledging that Geisinger's plan has been pretty disruptive. But instead of letting fear drive decisions, Geisinger's people decided that a healthcare system that's dedicated to the compassionate care of patients had no choice but to refund money to those who who were unhappy with its services, and that this would be done for any of the 3 million people the company served with absolutely no questions asked. The program was actually termed Proven Experience, and it was driven by CEO Dr. David Feinberg and demanded that all employees be genuine, attentive, communicative, and accountable in order to promote performance transparency. Now, I think the fact that that's not the norm in healthcare is a major issue, but anyway, the program started with a successful pilot study which allowed certain patients to access an app to report their experience and, if they chose, to request a refund. And they added a phrase to the app which I thought was just wonderful. It says, "You placed your full trust in us, and we now place our trust in you." And isn't that what relationships should be all about, even between a consumer and a healthcare system? Well, a year later, here's what's happened. Several hundred people did ask for refunds, which totaled $500,000. Interestingly enough, this did not represent an increase in the adjustments to patient bills. It had no impact on the bottom line, and it's too early to tell if the number and costs of lawsuits have been reduced or any other metrics have been affected. Several systems evolved during the year to address patients who asked for refunds. While claims had to be investigated, employees were instructed to never question the patient's perception of care or motives for asking for a refund. While costing little, the initiative has improved care as problems were identified during the process. As a result, kindness and compassion for patients has become a fundamental part of the mission of the company. Now, Geisinger didn't end up in bankruptcy, and patients didn't take advantage of the offer for refunds. And in fact, since there was no net change in the amount of money credited, what I think most likely happened is that bills were just adjusted sooner rather than later. And this happens all the time, by the way. I've gone through it with utilities and people who sold me merchandise or service that was delivered poorly, where you just dig in your heels and scream and holler until an adjustment is made on the bill. I think what happened is they just moved up that process, and people who were truly unhappy, they got their refunds earlier. And it probably led to much better feelings about Geisinger. There's a considerable amount of research that shows that your happiest customer who promotes you the most is often not the person who has always had a pleasant experience with you, but the person who had an unpleasant experience and then you made it right. Those people often become the better advocates. Well, Burke finished his article with this statement: "I hope that other hospital systems learn from our experience with the refund promise and take steps to disrupt the status quo by offering the same to their patients." And I'll piggyback on that and say I hope that healthcare in general starts evolving much more quickly to a patient-centered system where healthcare providers and institutions are ever mindful of the fact that these are paying customers. And you can't, if you own a restaurant, you can't treat people the way some physicians and healthcare providers and institutions treat their patients. And so I think that healthcare, it's a different business in many ways, but in many ways, it's just like any other business. You're dealing with people, you're helping them solve their problems, and you're accountable to them for doing a good job and doing it with a smile on your face and a compassionate attitude. All right, that's all for today and for the week. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and I will be back to you next week with more news.